And welcome back to EDH Deck Building. I am your host, Demo, and we got some more Streets of New Capenna cards to talk about here. The commanders, of course. And man, they're really pouring it on with these commanders as far as, you know, designing commanders specifically for commander, right? Designing legendary creatures specifically for commander. And I realize they've been doing it for a while, but in this set, it really seems like they're doing that. So let's get to it. I got 3 to talk about today, and we're going to start with Cross Defense Contractor. 1, a white, a blue, and a green. So a Bant Commander, Cat Advisor 2/4. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a shield counter on target creature an opponent controls. So when I first came across these shield counters, and I did not realize that it specifically does something, they have now made specific rules involved with a counter referred to as a shield counter, which they don't actually have written on the card, which I don't love. I'm sort of a big fan of, you know, as long as you see what's on the card, you know what it does rather than having to go look it up. But as I did the commander from yesterday that actually did explain what a shield counter is, it essentially is totem armor, very similar, right? So if that creature would be destroyed, instead you remove the shield counter and it's fine. So that's pretty interesting. I knew that I had seen shield counters before, right? And this is kind of why it's a little confusing. There is a card, Palatian Accord, 3 white, blue enchantment. Whenever a creature an opponent controls becomes tapped, put a shield counter on Palatian Accord. So if they're changing the rules and saying that shield counter does specifically something, now what happens to this card? I mean, I'm sure they have some statement they've released for it. I don't know. You can remove a shield counter from Palatian Accord, prevent the next one damage that would be dealt to you this turn. So if shield counters now in the game of Magic mean that you can remove them to avoid something getting destroyed, then I would say that would be the same with Palatian Accord, right? Wouldn't it, right? Wouldn't Palatian Accord now, wouldn't you be able to remove, even though those shield counters do something completely different for Palatian Accord, wouldn't you be able to remove them to prevent it from getting destroyed if someone cast a Bane of Progress? I would imagine that would be the case. Also, Nesting Grounds, I move right now. If you have any of those commanders, and I think they're all in Bant colors with the shield counters, you can now Nesting Grounds and have this in your deck and start moving those shield counters onto all your creatures. Or even if you didn't have that deck, right? If you had any deck at all, because again, now they've changed the rules so that shield counters specifically do that thing. So now you can just put Palatian Accord in any deck and start Nesting Grounds, moving those counters onto your creatures, right? I mean, if that's in the game of Magic, if that's what shield counters now represent, that they can do that, then that should be the case with this card, right? I think anyway. But moving on. Obviously, the interesting thing here is that you're putting these shield counters on your opponent's creatures, okay? So already you know you're going to be in a little bit of a politics deck. Whenever you put 1 or more counters on a creature you don't control, tap that creature and goad it. It gains trample until your next turn. So I like this and I don't like it. The first thing, Generous Patron is an auto-include in this deck, right? Obviously. This is kind of similar to Volroth. Like the way I did Volroth is I did a lot more putting counters on my opponent's creatures, which was an interesting strategy to go with. You can do this here as well. You can actually, like whenever you put 1 or more counters on a creature you don't control, tap that creature. So if you put counters on all your opponent's creatures, they should all be goaded, right? So that seems pretty good. And there are a few cards that do. And Nils is going to be a great fit in this deck, obviously. It's already a pretty good political card. It's going to be a little bit political, this deck in general. I just don't love the goading. Like we're getting a little too much with the goading. I'm getting a little tired of it. They seem to be doing that a bit too much. And I would have loved this commander, and I absolutely would have built around it if it wasn't the goat. I know a lot of people like it. For me, I find that it just annoys your opponents, and I don't love doing stuff that annoys people because, well, one, it doesn't make for a super fun game if you're annoying your opponents all the time, and then they're getting upset at you and so on and so forth. I know you're always going to be doing stuff that makes your opponents maybe a tad miffed, let's just say. But goad in particular, again, just like stealing your opponent's stuff, there's certain strategies that tend to just really rub people the wrong way, and that's one of them. Constantly goading your opponent's creatures can get a little annoying because that's really what this deck is doing, right? That's all you're doing in this deck is you're trying to put counters on your opponent's stuff so that you can goad it. So It is really a goad deck. It's about as goad as you get, right? With a commander. So because that's really all you're going to be doing with this deck. I wish there was something else. I wish it wasn't goad, because I really like the idea here of finding interesting ways to put counters on your opponent's creatures. The goading, I wish it was, I mean, even if it was just draw a card. I mean, that's a bit too powerful maybe, because obviously it's going to be really easy to find ways to put, not really easy, but it is going to be easy, I think, to put counters on your opponent's creatures. Magnetic Web, there we go again. I haven't talked about Magnetic Web in a while. It's going to be fantastic fit in this deck, I think. Really easy way to put counters on creatures, and also fits with the goading and the combat tricks. It's going to be a really fun card in this deck. I mean, if you like this kind of thing, I'm sure there's a lot of people that are really excited about it. I just don't love the goad. I wish it would be, I don't know. I guess there's only so many options. The goad is getting to be a little bit much. That's my only issue there. All right, we're moving on to Fabine, Boss's Confidant. 3 red, green, and a white cat advisor. By the way, advisor is a really popular creature type in the game. I mean, we just had 2 more. There's a lot of advisors. I think, just throwing it out there, some sort of an advisor tribal thing at some point would be an interesting. It's another idea that I came up with for a commander, is some sort of advisor tribal. Anyway, 3/6 creature tokens you control have haste. So already you can do any sort of creature token theme in this deck, obviously, and there's lots of that going on in Naya colors. In fact, there's probably a lot of Naya commanders already. Gared obviously comes to mind. Rin and Siri, right? It's going to give all those creature tokens you're making have haste. So I think this probably goes in the 99 of a few decks for sure. Has Parlay, and we have not seen that in a long time, right? That originally appeared in Conspiracy, I believe. Have not. I don't think they have made a Parlay card in quite some time. So at the beginning of combat on your turn, so Parlay is obviously, what makes it an interesting sort of ability in Commander is it involves all players, which is interesting. At the beginning of combat on your turn, each player reveals the top card of their library. For each land card revealed this way, you create a 1/1 green and white citizen creature token. Then creatures you control get +1/+1 till end of turn for each non-land card revealed this way. Then each player draws a card. Very interesting. So very similar to Selvala, right? The green-white Selvala, which is letting everyone draw, which people really like that, right? So you're doing a little bit of hug thing here, which because people like that, they're going to tend to leave you alone, but you're also in a very aggro-y theme, right? At the beginning of combat on your turn. So everyone's going to reveal that card. Obviously, you could do a little bit of Sensei's Divining Top. I manipulate the top of my library to get the outcome that I want. That would be really easy to do here, obviously. For each land card, you get a citizen token, and then your whole team gets +1/+1 for each non-land card revealed this way. So I would imagine what you'd want to do, again, for manipulating yourself, and there are ways to manipulate your opponent's libraries as well. I don't know if you need to go too much down that, but after you get a pretty good team, now you're going to be wanting to flip non-land cards off of your library so that your team gets +1/+1, because you're already going to have a bunch of creatures. They're going to be mostly 1/1, so you're going to really want to pump them up. It's interesting. The Parlay's interesting. Again, maybe K&T is another commander that this is comparable to, because, when someone plays a K&T deck, everyone likes it because they get to draw or they get to put lands into play. So they can maybe tend to leave you alone. They definitely tend to not kill your commander, right? So if you have your Fabine in play, it'll be interesting to see, because people are going to be like, oh, well, I kind of want to draw, so I'm not going to kill their commander. But, if I don't, then it's going to keep cranking out tokens and pumping the team and all that. So that's kind of an interesting way they did it there, where you're certainly in a very aggro theme here for sure. Just spitting out tokens and they have haste and you're pumping them. But because you're letting your opponents draw, they might want to leave your commander alone. So this could be a really interesting one for sure. And finally today we got Evelyn the Covetous. 2, a hybrid Dimir mana and a black, and then a hybrid Rakdos mana. Very interesting casting cost. And I don't know. I'm trying to think, have we had a card with 2 different hybrid mana? Yeah, we have. I think we have. Gee, I don't know now. That's a very interesting casting cost for sure. You can just cast this with black mana though, right? You can just do 2 black, black, black. But obviously it's a Grixis commander, Vampire Rogue 2/5 with flash, and it's always great to have flash on your commander. Whenever Evelyn the Covetous or another vampire enters the battlefield, I knew it was going to have an ETB because it has flash. Under your control, exile the top card of each player's library with a collection counter on it. Once each turn, you may play a card from exile with a collection counter on it if it was exiled by an ability you controlled. You may spend mana as though it were any color to cast it. So again, with this thing, and again, it would be great if they had a keyword here, the I exile my opponent's stuff and I can use any mana to cast it. I've been saying that for a while. I don't know. Maybe they don't need to. It is a mouthful though. So we're doing this again. And again, it is something that people do like to do in Commander, play their opponent's stuff. The very interesting word. I mean, first of all, you're in a little bit of Vampire Tribal here, right? So you're going to get this trigger when your commander enters the battlefield or another vampire enters the battlefield. You get to do it as well. However, once each turn, so you can do this on each turn. So obviously on your turn, you can play a card from exile with a collection counter on it. Maybe it's a land. You play your land for turn. On your opponent's turn, you can cast Instants. It would be probably, without knowing much else about this, Leyline of Anticipation or Vidalcan Orrery, so that now you're allowed to cast stuff on everyone's turn. No matter what you exile, other than lands, no matter what you exile, now you can play that stuff on your opponent's turn. So I think those cards are probably going to be really, really important in this deck. However, you may play a card from exile with a collection counter on it, and it's only going to have a collection counter on it if you exile it with your commander's ability, right? Pretty sure there's no other things that use collection counters. But they also say if it was exiled by an ability you control. So I guess that's covering the situation of your opponent also playing an Evelyn deck, right? That must be covering that situation. So if your opponent is also playing Evelyn, they're going to have cards exiled with collection counters on it. And obviously, if they didn't put that wording in there, you would be able to play their cards they've exiled with collection counters on them as well. I think that would be interesting. I mean, I suppose they have to have these cards, available for standard and everything. But in a commander format, I think that would actually be really funny if you had two people playing Evelyn and they're both exiling stuff with collection counters on them and they get to pick the other guys if they want to. You can't do that here, obviously. It's a lot of the same thing. I'm exiling the top cards of my opponent's library and mine, and then I get to play them. They're just doing it in a different way. This is a little boring. I don't know. I know people will like it. I don't think we've done this in Grixis colors before, so you are going to have the option. Like the thing is, you only get to play a card from exile with a collection counter on it. So you don't get to do it with anything else. You don't get to play other stuff you've exiled. So putting all the other stuff in there that exiles opponents' libraries and stuff is not really, I don't know if you want to do that here. I don't think I mean, you could put a Praetor's Grasp in this deck, but there's no particular reason to. The only reason to do it is because you're just doing lots of stuff like that already, but your commander is doing that exclusively. So I think you just want to put lots of vampires in this deck so that you're getting lots of those triggers, right? When Evelyn or another vampire enters the battlefield under your control. Yeah. So you just want lots of vampires coming into play, getting that trigger. That's probably what you want to do here. This really is probably a vampire tribal deck more than anything, because the more vampires you have ETB, the more cards that you will exile, and then the more you'll get to play. Yeah, it's okay. It's interesting. Again, I just feel like they're doing the same thing that we've seen a lot before, just doing it a little bit differently. Ultimately, not super impressed with any of these three, just because it feels like all three of them, even though, again, I like the Cross, even though he is, I don't like that he's goading. And haven't really seen goading in Bant colors, I guess, but I would really have liked to have seen, I love I put counters on my opponent's creature tribal, but I wish the payoff was something different. The Fabine is interesting. I like the Parlay. Parlay is a very interesting, just like voting, same thing. Those are very interesting. Those conspiracy mechanics are very interesting in a commander game. It makes for really good politics. Again, because you want to draw. I want to draw off of your commander, but at the same time, I want to kill your commander. It makes for an interesting situation. Really makes you think. Three really interesting commanders, though, for sure. No question about it. How popular are these guys going to be? I can't tell. There's so many commanders already that are just, I guess, legendary creatures that are just so engineered for commander. It is going to be really difficult to figure out how this is all going to shake out at the end. I honestly am not sure, but three more for you anyway to give some thought to. That is it for today, and thanks for tuning in.